So you want a DSLR, but you're also on a budget. Do not worry, I have you covered. Because in this video, we're gonna go over the most budget-friendly options out there that also deliver quality photos and videos, so you get a great camera. Whether you're a beginner, enthusiast, or a pro, we'll help you find the perfect camera for you. Also, if you're new to the channel, we review dozens of cameras on this channel every single year, so whatever you're looking for, we've got you covered. But most importantly, make sure to check out the links in the description down below for the best deals on the gear that we talk about today. So the first camera I want to talk to you guys about today is the Nikon B500, mainly because it's the cheapest camera on the market right now with an amazing zoom lens. It may not be the fanciest camera out there, but if you're just casually capturing your life, this will be more than enough. Plus, this camera has a really unique lo-fi look to it that I think is really interesting. The B500 is technically not a DSLR, but I don't think anybody is going to be turned off from this camera because of that, because it still looks like a DSLR and has that same robust feeling in your hands when you're shooting with it. On the outside, the body type is pretty much the same. And technology-wise, it doesn't fall that far behind a DSLR. It does 7.4 frames per second, which is good enough for any kind of casual parties, sports games, and travel. But what makes taking pictures with this camera so special is the insane zoom range. It goes from 24 all the way to 900 millimeters, which allows for limitless flexibility in terms of how you want to shoot with this camera. The main difference that most people find between the B500 and a DSLR is the sensor size. DSLRs have an APS-C size sensor, which is much bigger and allows for more light when you're capturing images. The B500 has a 1-inch sensor, which is closer to that of a point and shoot. You can kind of think of the B500 as a point and shoot on steroids, a ton of steroids. Quality-wise, you're ending up with something closer to a point and shoot or a really nice iPhone with the added benefit of this crazy zoom lens. But if you're someone that's serious about their photography and video, you probably want something higher quality. The rest of this list is exactly those kinds of cameras without breaking the bank. I've specifically chosen cameras that are budget-friendly but also deliver a high-quality photo and video. But if you want something that's cost-saving and it doesn't need to be high quality for whatever you're using it for, the B500 is a great choice. The only thing I would look out for is that this camera doesn't have a rechargeable battery and instead takes 4 AA's. And something to note, when it comes to video, this camera only does up to 30 frames per second in full HD. After that, if you want slow motion, it reduces the quality greatly, and I don't really think it's worth using after that. Alright guys, so let's talk about the first real DSLR on this list, and that is the Canon T7. The biggest selling point of the Canon T7 is that it's extremely user-friendly and simple and straightforward. It's kind of like an Apple product. It's super minimal and well-designed. Plus, it's got great colors and image quality right out of the camera. This camera almost needs no editing. And when it comes to the sensor, it does have a proper 24 megapixel APS-C size sensor like you would expect from a DSLR. But one really interesting thing is that you'll also see this exact same sensor in more expensive $600 or even $800 cameras like the Canon M50 or Canon 80D. The sensor on this camera is pretty impressive when you consider the price points. But something that does hold this camera back is that it does not shoot very fast. It only shoots 3 frames per second, which is, again, more than good enough for casual shooters that are just starting out. The only place where you'll really run into an issue is if you have a very fast-moving subject like a running dog, a car, or something that's just flying by you. Chances are you won't be able to capture the action because of that slower frame rate. For everything else, it does a terrific job. But thankfully, the autofocus in this camera is very reliable in photo mode and will more than keep up with your subject, even if your subject is moving around a lot. When it comes to video, this camera really drops the ball in my opinion. Because it's a budget camera, it only shoots full HD up to 30 frames per second with no slow-mo options, and the video autofocus is abysmal. It is just basically unusable. Video in this camera is a nice to have feature, but I wouldn't recommend this camera to someone who has video as a priority. However, where this camera does shine is the build and design. The T7 is rock solid. It's made of polycarbonate plastic, but it's built like a tank. I would not hesitate taking this on road trips, to the beach, or just tossing this in my backpack as my everyday camera. Though I will say this, I am not a fan of the 18-35 kit lens. It's a great lens if you want to save money, but the quality is subpar in terms of sharpness, and it's not great in low light. But if you can afford it, I recommend getting this camera without the kit lens and instead picking up the 24mm or 40mm prime lens. They're slightly more expensive, but they're extremely sharp and super worth the money. Plus, the ergonomics and the ease of use is phenomenal. Canon has a minimalist design philosophy, so this camera doesn't overwhelm you with a ton of buttons or pages and pages of menus. It has a pretty simple button layout, and it's pretty obvious and easy to understand what everything does. And the menus are easy to understand with only a few pages. The Canon T7 is about as complex as a cell phone camera on pro mode. This camera is really easy to pick up and get great results with, even if you're a beginner or simply shooting in auto mode. But the Canon T7 does have one major shortcoming, and that is mainly because it's a budget camera. It doesn't have a side articulating screen, which means the screen is just stuck to the back of the camera. So if you want to get high angle or low angle shots, you're basically out of luck. And a lot of you guys probably want a camera that's good with video, and the Canon T7 unfortunately just doesn't deliver. But have no fear, like always, I have you covered. So overall, the Canon T7 is a great option for someone that's a beginner or a newbie and wants to do mainly photos. This is a phenomenal photo camera at a great price, and it gives you phenomenal quality, mainly because of the colors and that 24 megapixel sensor. But for those of you who want video and a little bit faster shooting rates, this next camera might just be perfect. And that is the Nikon D3500. The D3500 is the camera I recommend the most to beginners and budget-conscious individuals if I can sense they're just a little bit serious about their photos and videos. The D3500 is definitely a camera for someone who plans to edit their photos and videos and possibly wants to do it professionally one day. The incredible thing about this camera is that despite being a beginner budget camera, the D3500 actually takes a lot from Nikon's Pro line of DSLRs. For starters, it has a 24 megapixel sensor, which again is pretty standard, but it shoots at 5 frames per second with continuous autofocus, which means this camera will not give you any trouble when it comes to shooting faster moving subjects. And while it may not be an ideal sports camera or action camera, it will do just fine with a running dog or a fast moving car. And something that most people don't know about Nikon cameras is that the raw codec in these cameras is extremely robust. If you plan to use this camera for art projects or something where you're going to do a lot of Photoshop and Lightroom editing, the Nikon D3500 is going to give you a lot more flexibility, especially compared to other cameras in this price range, like the T7. But unlike the T7, it also does a great job with video. It shoots full HD at 24 and 30 frames per second, which is real time, but it also shoots 60 frames per second in full HD slow motion, which is very, very rare for a beginner camera in this price point. So if you're someone who cares about getting a good deal and the most that they possibly can for their money, the D3500 is definitely a camera you should be interested in. Plus, I'm happy to say the autofocus is fast and reliable in both photo and video mode. This camera is a good fit for both photographers and video shooters. The one thing that really impressed me about the D3500 is the kit lens that it comes with. Generally, kit lenses are hot garbage and are never worth the money. But the kit lens that the D3500 comes with has a really smooth autofocus ring. It feels super worth the money just in terms of the sharpness and the premium build quality. And when it comes to design, this is where the Nikon D3500 has a lot of the same problems as the Canon T7, but a lot of the same benefits as well. Firstly, it's a well-built camera that feels really solid in your hands. It's even better built than the T7, which is saying a lot because the T7 is a tank. It also has a fixed LCD screen, which makes shooting high and low angles really tough. However, if you like the D3500, but you really want that side articulating screen, the Nikon D5600 is basically the same camera, but has more horsepower and better design. It has better autofocus, better high ISO performance, but most importantly, it has a side articulating screen, which makes it a pretty decent camera for YouTube. The layout of the buttons and menus in the D3500 is not as simple and straightforward as the Canon cameras. For most people, myself included, it can feel a bit messy or cluttered. But I've been using the D3500 for a couple of years now, and after a while you get pretty used to it. And I also realized that the D3500 is more geared towards pro usage than beginner usage. Plus, the Nikon D3500 actually does a lot more than the Canon T7 can, so naturally you're gonna have more buttons and more menu pages. The D3500 is a fantastic camera for someone who wants to get started with shooting photos and videos and is looking to really invest themselves into this as a hobby or has professional aspirations. And honestly, if you think you want to be a professional photographer, the D3500 is an amazing camera to start with. So I've reviewed tons of cameras on this channel, and in case you can't tell, I'm pretty in love with it. But here's the thing, if you want to get great photos and great video, it's not really the gear that you have, it's how you use it. So if you really want to learn how to use your gear to its full potential, I created a free training of my top 7 secrets to show you how to get the most out of the gear that you're using right now, even if that gear is a smartphone. I put a link in the description down below, so be sure to check that out.